The one thing that the Chinese understand, they don't understand charm, they don't understand dialogue, they understand reciprocity. And, you know, they have a self-interest, we have a self-interest. We've got to be very hard-nosed about it. Look, there's no doubt about what China is. They've destroyed democracy in Hong Kong. And as you already pointed out, Putin would probably be losing the war in Ukraine without Chinese support. These people are not our friends. They are traders and we are traders. And we have to find an adjustment in that relationship where we both have sufficient benefit while understanding the risks.
Keir Starmer, he is now, as he keeps telling those journalists accompanying him on the trip, he's the first British Prime Minister to visit China in almost a decade. After landing in Beijing, Keir Starmer addressed the 50 business leaders he'd brought with him.
Of course, we will have to manage our differences, but that's what you do with a mature, consistent, comprehensive and strategic approach to China. We manage our differences, we take our opportunities, and we constantly think, how does this deliver for people back at home?
Well, how will it go? Edward Lucas is on the line, the Times columnist. Hello to you, Edward.
Hello, John.
It's great to have you here. So a broad statement of agreement on economic cooperation is comparatively easy, isn't it? Though it will have to be carefully worded. On human rights in Ukraine, Starmer, he has to speak out, although he is walking on eggshells.
Yes, I was interested in his use of the word strategic, because, of course, the thing we're lacking is a real China strategy, where we set priorities and say we're willing to make some sacrifices on X because we want Y, and we're going to push very hard on Z because we want A, B, and C. And life is full of difficult trade-offs, and I'm afraid that we are still really in the dark about what Keir Starmer wants. It's fine to go to China and talk to the Chinese, but dialogue is not an end in itself. We need to know what it's for, and that, I think, is still missing.
Right, now, on Ukraine, China, it's fair to say, sustains Russia in this. What does China gain, Edward, from the instability and the economic disruption that is caused by the Chinese partnership with Vladimir Putin?
Well, China's not thrilled about this war. They don't like the nuclear saber rattling. They didn't like the spike in food and fuel and fertilizer prices caused by the war. But on the whole, they don't want to see Russia lose, and they're prepared to bankroll Russia to some extent. If they wanted to, they could pull the plug on Vladimir Putin pretty hard and pretty quickly. But they do enjoy the disarray. It's very good for them to see the transatlantic gulf deepening, and countries like Canada, for example, now flirting energetically with China as a way of trying to balance their relationships with the United States.
Yeah, and a word, if we could, on the reports that the White House, the Trump administration, won't agree to security support for a peacekeeping coalition in Ukraine until Ukraine agrees to surrender unconquered territory in the Donbas region of Ukraine. It's just what Ukraine and its friends feared, isn't it? And there have been plenty of indications that Trump has been now leaning towards Russia again in seeking this ceasefire deal.
Well, I think the Ukrainians have long since given up any hope of the Trump administration really coming dramatically and decisively to their aid. And increasingly, it's the Europeans who shoulder the burden now of supporting Ukraine. I think the big worry would be if Trump tried to put pressure on the Europeans to make the Ukrainians sign a bad deal.
Yes.
And in the end, Trump has some powerful levers he can pull against Europe, and he might try and get us to do that. On the other hand, I think in the current mood, there'll be some serious European pushback as well. So in a way, Ukraine is hostage a bit to the woes of the transatlantic alliance. But I think the big point is there is no chance of the Europeans putting in, or the Americans putting in, or the Brits putting in the hundreds of thousands of troops that would be needed to make a serious sort of Cold War style defence of Ukraine. Actually, by far the most important defence of Ukraine is the Ukrainian army. And why would they want to move from their fortress belt, which they've defended so successfully considerable cost against these Russian meat grinder attacks. So I think I'm basically pretty sceptical about these peace talks, barring some dramatic move by Trump. Yes. I don't think that there's that they're going to amount to anything, and I think this time next year we'll still be talking about the fighting.
All right. It's always great to talk to you, Edward Lucas. Thank you. Now, I want to turn to Sir Richard Dearlove, the former head of MI6, the Secret Intelligence Service. Sir Richard, welcome.
Yeah. Hello, John. Yeah.
Hi, good to have you. So just give me your thoughts, first of all, on the value of an economic cooperation agreement of the kind that we know is going to be signed at the end of during the Starmer visit to China. And how does he navigate the risks of being too close?
Well, it's a very difficult equation, and we're talking about the balance of risk. China is the UK's fourth largest trading partner. It's a very imbalanced relationship. The Chinese sell a lot more to us than we sell to them, and maybe there's some deals that can be done with China that sort of more equalize that exchange and have some benefit to the economy. But one has to bear in mind that there are serious problems in doing business with China, particularly in areas that touch on the UK's national security. What I'm thinking of is critical national infrastructure. And of course, the Chinese are pretty heavily embedded, unwisely, I think, in aspects of our energy systems. Particularly renewables, electric cars. There's a whole range of things. So, look, this is a very difficult equation. I'm not an isolationist, but I think on balance, there's a bigger risk to our national security than there is a bigger economic benefit in trying to push this relationship.
Right, and how should that sentiment translate into a policy, if that's possible? I mean, all the discussion on this comes down with a general idea of keeping our hand out for business deals and our guard up against risk. I mean, can it be translated into a clearer policy than that?
We've got a pretty good example, a much more clear-minded example in the Australian government. The Australian economy is far more tied with China than ours is because of the supply of commodities from Australia to Chinese industry, but the Australian government have been pretty hard-nosed in dealing with China. And the one thing that the Chinese understand, they don't understand charm, they don't understand dialogue, they understand reciprocity. And, you know, they have a self-interest, we have a self-interest, we've got to be very hard-nosed about it. Look, there's no doubt about what China is. They've destroyed democracy in Hong Kong, and as you already pointed out, Putin would probably be losing the war in Ukraine without Chinese support. These people are not our friends. They are traders, and we are traders, and we have to find an adjustment in that relationship where we both have sufficient benefit while understanding the risks.
I'm just trying to picture in my mind and imagine the conversation between the Prime Minister and President Xi when the subject turns to China's support for Russia, assuming it does. I mean, with the best will in the world, Richard, it's hard to imagine that Xi is going to care very much about what Starmer says on this. I mean, how should he broach the subject and deal with it?
Well, it's very tough indeed, and this is why I'm not sure it's worth talking to him, because, you know, resetting Chinese relations with China doesn't require a prime ministerial visit when there's such obvious gaps in the relationship which are never going to be bridged. So I guess, you know, the prime minister will make his statement and Xi will nod his head and say nothing. I mean, I've been in China for negotiation. I was part of the team for the handover of Hong Kong, and I was there to sort of help wind up certain assets we had in Hong Kong with Chinese agreement. The Chinese are very, very hard, very pragmatic, and, you know, do their own thing. They listen to you, say yes. But I mean, look, over Hong Kong, they completely broke the joint declaration. So what was the point of that negotiation? Yeah.
So at the pinnacle, at the summit of this relationship on this crucial issue, the conversation's almost meaningless.
I personally fear so. I mean, if he came away having secured the release of Jimmy Lai, and if he came away having secured an undertaking for the Chinese to stop buying Russian energy cheap, that would be a huge achievement. Is he going to achieve that? No way. We'll get a little bit of investment. We'll get, and probably we'll get things that begin to impinge on our energy security as well. So, look, this is a very risky area. We've put far too much attention on this visit. It could have been done by a junior minister, and the result probably would have been the same.
Right. I do want to ask your thoughts on Ukraine and the role of President Trump. Reports now that the White House won't agree to the security support for a peacekeeping coalition in Ukraine until Ukraine agrees to surrender unconquered territory in the Donbass region. It is what Ukraine and Ukraine's friends will have feared, and there have been plenty of indications that President Trump was leaning towards Russia's position in seeking a ceasefire. So I guess a lot of people who watch closely would say there's no surprise in this, but it's still a pretty dispiriting thing to see play out.
It is dispiriting, and it's the one area of Trump's policy in relation to Russia that I think is extremely disturbing for us in Europe, faced with this very severe long-term security crisis engendered by the Ukrainian war. But what I would say is that Trump has sort of marched up to this issue and then been pulled back already 3 or 4 times in the past year. So I'm not absolutely convinced that this is, as it were, his end position. He has been pulled away. He listens to some European leaders, particularly, for example, the Prime Minister of Finland. And there is a severe security problem here for Europe.
Yes.
I think one thing that is important is even Trump may be running out of patience with Putin, who has shown absolutely no concessions away from his original objectives in invading Ukraine. So he's not had any indication of a sort of reverse gear on his Russian policy. He's still going for a maximum return. And I think the Americans are getting pretty fed up with that.
Right. I mean, so again, not astonishing, but still dispiriting to see now the White House has a framed photo of President Trump side by side with Vladimir Putin, framed and hung up on the White House wall.
Yeah, well, I do find that a little disturbing myself. And but I do remember he put the bust of Churchill back in the Oval Office, which Obama had taken out.
Yeah,
So
well, I presume he did that because Obama had taken it out. Can you give us a thought on the story of Iran, where the president is now putting on social media a reference to what he's calling this big, beautiful armada? It's certainly enormously powerful, bearing down on Iran. What do you think is the meaning of that?
I think it's to put enhanced pressure on the theocratic leadership in Iran, which I think is tottering. And certainly some of my Israeli contacts at the moment think that a further attack on Iran is imminent. They now have the assets in place, which they didn't a few weeks ago. I think Greenland was a very good distraction whilst they put this carrier deployment in place. They now have all the capability they need. And I think a further attack on the regime is quite probable, in my opinion.
Oh, well, really interesting to get your view, Richard. Thank you. Sir Richard Dearlove, the former head of the Secret Intelligence Service MI6.